This video is brought to you by Skillshare, the largest online learning community for creatives with thousands of classes in countless categories, designed by creatives for creatives. Hey guys, it's Celestia, and if there's one dumb take I've heard more than any other in the art community, it's that digital art is so much easier than traditional art that it's basically inferior. And I've pretty vocally expressed my disagreement with that since the very beginning of this channel. I did a whole video about it a long time ago, and I've reiterated my arguments on many occasions since then. I've actively done both digital and traditional art extensively for over a decade, and in my experience I've never found one to be unilaterally more difficult than the other. Sure, aside from the basic fundamentals, they require different skills, but the skills required of one aren't harder than the ones required of the other just because they are different. That's the same with any medium of art. A photographer and a painter both need a strong understanding of lighting and composition to depict the same subject, but they need different skills to expand upon that foundation by interpreting it in different forms. And trying to judge which skill set is more difficult and therefore more impressive is almost entirely subjective. Not to mention the fact that the people saying one is harder than the other usually know little to nothing about how many skills are required of the one they think is easier. My opinion on that has not changed. I stand by it. Maybe even more than I did before after several more years of experience proved it right. But another opinion has changed, that if neither is superior, you don't need to learn one to do the other. Most people argue that you should learn to make art traditionally before digitally, because it teaches you the fundamentals that you need for both more effectively. But I've never really agreed with that. As far as I'm concerned, there are no skills that you need for digital art that you can't learn by doing digital art. Yeah, you won't learn how to use traditional tools, but you don't need to if you don't ever intend to use them. The things you do need to learn, composition, color theory, anatomy, and so on, you can learn just as well digitally as you can traditionally. And for a very long time, I was confident that all of the things that you learn from making traditional art that are applicable and useful for digital art can be learned from just making digital art, and that the ones that aren't necessary to make good digital art if that's all you want to do. But after spending the past few months rediscovering my love for traditional painting while making some gifts for family and experimenting with new mediums, I realized that to my shock and horror, I was actually kind of wrong about that. I mean, for the most part, I still believe it to be true, but there's one skill in particular that I realized you just don't develop almost at all if you just make digital art, and it is one that you actually do need for both mediums. I realized this because in spending years focusing the majority of my time and attention on my digital art for work, I almost completely lost it without traditional art to make me practice it, which was a genuinely alarming realization to come to. And while I had always understood its importance in traditional art, it took having to relearn it to show me that it was equally important for digital art, even if the undo tool makes us feel like it isn't. So that in mind, in today's video, I'm going to talk about the biggest skill that digital art can't teach you, and how important it is to learn it anyway, even if you never want to make a single piece of the traditional art needed to teach it to you again. Because its impact and significance are unacceptably underestimated, which I can say because I underestimated it and suffered the consequences. But before we start talking about the learning limitations of digital art that I had naively failed to notice for so long, I want to take a moment to mention one way that you can remove those limitations, by tackling all of your artistic weaknesses in any medium directly on Skillshare, the sponsor of today's video. Skillshare is, in my opinion, the best learning resource out there for creatives looking to do anything from exploring new hobbies and interests to turning passions into careers. And with such a wide variety of classes available, any skill that you're struggling to learn is one that they can help you master. And those classes are led by industry experts with real experience in a multitude of creative fields, like illustration, animation, film, photography, crafting, design, and so much more. So not only can you learn from their experience, you can take advantage of Skillshare's Learn by Doing approach to teaching that allows you to consult those teachers and your peers directly for feedback and advice on your class creations. In my case, like I said earlier, it's my recently renewed interest in traditional art that got me thinking about this particular skill that you can only learn by making it that we'll talk about today. But inadvertently, in the process of experimenting with it again, I also rediscovered my love of a medium that I've always neglected: watercolor. I work with pencil, pen, markers, acrylics, gouache, even charcoals, but there's something about watercolor that's always both appealed to and intimidated me, so I almost never use it with the occasional exception of watercolor pencils. But I love drawing nature, and watercolors are so perfect for that, so when I found Rosalie Hazlett's class, Watercolor in the Woods, A Beginner's Guide to Painting the Natural World, I decided it was the perfect chance to confront that fear and finally give it a real try. And it took almost almost no time at all for me to wonder why it had taken me so long, because it made me love working with watercolor more than I ever thought I could. She teaches you everything from how to take the perfect reference photo in nature to the best materials to use. But what I found most helpful by far were the techniques she shared on how to use watercolor layering and texturing to add depth to your art. Also, I mean, you get to paint a mushroom, and who doesn't love mushrooms? Honestly, it was one of the most rewarding and genuinely fun classes that I've taken in a long time, and I can't recommend it enough to anyone interested in exploring the medium themselves. So it's linked in the description for you to check out too. But wonderful as it is, it's really just the beginning. Because even if watercolor isn't for you, whatever medium or field you are interested in, Skillshare has classes just like this one that can teach you how to take your skill at it to the next level, as a career, a hobby, or anything in between. And you can find that out for yourself today, because the first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So why wait? Get started today. But in order to learn a skill on Skillshare, or at all, really, you have to know what that skill is. And if you've only worked with digital art, like I said, you might not know how important this one is or how little you're able to develop it within the boundaries of that medium. So let's talk about it. When people talk about how much easier digital art is than traditional art, the first thing almost all of them mention is the undo tool. They claim that because every mistake can be effortlessly undone, the need for skill is absent. You can get a brushstroke wrong as many times as you want and it doesn't matter, because you have an infinite number of tries to get it right and no consequences when you don't. With traditional art, there's a permanence there, so every brushstroke that looks right is, conversely, the product of sufficient skill to get it right the first time rather than on the 90th attempt. But number one, that's not true. Erasers exist. You can paint over mistakes. You can trace over your sketches with tracing paper so that your line art is perfect with none of the mistakes present in the original. There's no shortage of techniques that traditional artists use to limit the permanence of mistakes. And number two, it's not like digital art lets you skip making those mistakes just because you can undo them without consequence. Even if you can undo a brushstroke over and over until you get it right, you still have to learn how to get it right through that trial and error. The fact that your errors aren't permanent doesn't mean you don't have to make them at all. And honestly, you have to make just as many before your art looks how you want it to. And in the process, you develop the same skills you would have had those mistakes been as permanent as they would have been in traditional art, because the permanence isn't the key factor in defining their development. So because of that, I spent a very long time thinking that was it. That was the end of the argument. The undo tool doesn't make digital art easy because you still have to make the mistakes and learn from them, whether they're permanent or not. It's faster and more convenient, sure, but not easier to the point that it doesn't make you develop the same skills that you would have traditionally. But I think I might have been wrong about that, and for a very long time too. I mean, not entirely, I still think that's fundamentally true, but going back to traditional art and making a million undoable mistakes made me realize that there's one skill the undo tool actually does stop you from learning, and it's one that's just as useful for digital art as it is for traditional: improvisation. That was my opinion's blind spot that I never properly considered. Yes, you still have to make mistakes whether you're using the undo tool or not, and making them teaches you how not to either way, but being able to undo them means you don't have to learn what to do when you've made one that you can't erase. Learning how not to make mistakes is not the only lesson to be learned from making them. Learning how to creatively problem solve and fix them once they've been made without being able to erase them and start over is just as important. I'd like to say that I had that realization while actually, like, painting or something, but I didn't. Well, technically I only did because I had been painting more recently, so that context was on my mind, but what actually made me realize how significant improvisation's role in art was putting on eyeliner. I don't wear makeup a lot anymore because I don't go anywhere, but lately I've been going on reading dates with my wife every weekend, so I've actually had occasion to, and naturally that's meant returning to the hell of regularly ruining the most perfectly smooth strokes of liquid eyeliner by blinking a little bit, or twitching, or breathing too much, or trying to make one side match the other by making it just a little bit thicker, only to make it too thick and then having to thicken the other side to match that, and start the whole cycle over again until I have more eyeliner than eye. And as frustrating as that is, it's prompted me to experiment with new looks to compensate for those mistakes when I wouldn't have otherwise. Because yes, you can wash it off and start over, but with liquid eyeliner, at least the cheap shit I use, having your eye be even slightly wet from being washed means it won't set right and it'll be all thin and streaky and gross. So it's not really a much better solution than just covering up mistakes instead. But because I screw it up so much, it never looks the same. Sometimes it's as perfectly thin as I want and it turns out exactly how I intended it to, but sometimes screwing it up means I have to make it thicker in new and creative ways that I wouldn't otherwise have tried out if necessity didn't force me to. And sometimes I like those results more than what I was trying to do in the first place. It's exactly the same with art. Digital art gives you all of the tools that you need to make a piece look exactly how you see it in your head, because even when you make mistakes and it falls short of that vision, the software allows you to seamlessly revise all of the areas in which it does until it's as close as it possibly can be to it. And that's great. Your eyeliner is always perfectly straight and symmetrically winged, and that's obviously a win. But if it's always exactly how you want it, that's all it'll ever be. You're limited by the boundaries of your own imagination. With traditional art, more often than not, you'll make a lot of mistakes in the process that can't be undone, and you'll only be able to erase or cover up so many of them. There are going to be some that you're just stuck with, and they'll ensure that the piece can't look how you originally wanted it to. And if it can't look how you planned it to, you have to come up with new ways on the spot to make it look good some other way. You have to abandon the goal of perfectly recreating your original concept and start figuring out how to adapt it into something new, shaped by the mistakes that will now need to be turned from errors into features. And that's a completely unique skill that you really can't learn any other way. If you mess up a line in pen, you're gonna have to find a way to incorporate it into the shading, obscure it with deliberate chicken scratch and adapt the rest of your line art to incorporate that look. Or find another way to make that mistake look right. That might mean changing your light source or making it more dramatic in ways that you otherwise wouldn't have considered or experimented with, exploring new stylistic elements outside of your comfort zone, or finding any number of creative solutions through trial and error that will ultimately add something unique and valuable to your work that you never could have planned for, and never would have had the opportunity to discover if you had just been able to undo that line. The same goes for any number of scenarios. You use a marker that ends up being a completely different shade than it seemed like it would be, and now you have to use a new color palette that ends up looking even better than the one that you planned to use. You only realize your composition is unbalanced after you've already committed to it, so you have to add new elements to balance it that end up giving it more character. Your asshole paintbrush leaves droplets of water and paint in the complete wrong place when you're not paying attention, and you have to incorporate that into the piece as if it was supposed to be there all along, giving it more texture and cohesion between the colors used. You make one eye's eyeliner too thick and end up with a look that you like better by making the other one match. And not only does all of this prompt more creative and unique results than you otherwise could have achieved, it also forces you to develop your skill at whatever you messed up more than if you had just been able to undo your mistake. Because in my opinion, you learn more from improvisation than just repetition. Undoing means you still have to learn that skill through repetition, but without it, having to learn it through improvisation instead forces you to engage more creatively and actively with the process and challenge your understanding of it. And it changes your mindset too. The versatility of digital art often leads artists to develop an obsession with perfectionism, because in theory, perfection is possible, and there's therefore such implicit pressure to do whatever you can to achieve it that you're left afraid of making any mistakes at all. There's the mentality that because you can erase any mistake with digital art, the presence of any is unacceptable. Everyone knows traditional art is going to have unfixable mistakes that are almost completely unavoidable, so people are vastly more forgiving of them. Digitally, the artist could have fixed or avoided them, so it's seen as a failure if they didn't. All of which thoroughly devalues the imperfection that gives art of all mediums so much charm and character. Imperfections in digital art are just as valuable as they are in traditional art, and being forced to accept them by making the latter gradually makes you more accepting of them in your digital work too. Improvisation in the face of mistakes that can't be undone changes everything about the way that you view how you make all art. It pushes you to take risks, experiment, and become more confident in your own skills, because you're not going to be afraid of making mistakes if you've already proven to yourself that you can turn any accident into an asset. I've always thought that all digital artists kind of have a fear of commitment to some degree, because it's not necessary to make any in that medium, but making those commitments pushes you to become a better artist, and it's easy to stagnate if you don't. All of this is essentially to say that all of these skills are just as important in digital art as they are in traditional art, and yet they're almost impossible to truly and thoroughly learn through the former, which is something I didn't realize myself until I focused solely on the former and lost them in the process. And that's a trap I think a lot of artists have unknowingly fallen into, hence why I wanted to talk about it. But before you start yelling, "But I hate making traditional art and I'm throwing the next person who tells me I have to into the sun," I'm not telling you that you have to. Traditional art forces you to learn improvisation by way of its very nature, so just by making it, you literally can't avoid developing that skill. That doesn't mean you can't manually force yourself to with digital art too. It just means that that has to be your active and directed decision, since the medium won't make you. You can force the same permanence that teaches improvisation digitally by doing at least some work or studies where you don't allow yourself to do anything that you couldn't do traditionally. No undoing, no liquefying, no transforming, no layers or layer modes, no color correction or overlays, just a digital canvas and digital brushes that you treat the same way that you would physical ones. It's not the medium itself that teaches you this skill, it's the limitations that it naturally imposes. And if you impose them yourself anyway, you can learn it in any medium you choose. And as it turns out, apparently it's more valuable than you might think to do so, at least every once in a while. That's just my opinion though, of course. For some people, being forced to improvise is, in and of itself, what they hate about traditional art. So forcing themselves to digitally is going to be just as miserable. It's not for everyone, one if the skills that you develop aren't worth the mental anguish of developing them, especially if doing so takes the joy out of art for you. That said, I do think it's worth it for anyone to at least give improvisation exercises a shot to find out though. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please check out my other content and consider subscribing if you did, because my physiological inability to shut up means I'm always making more like it. Special thank you as always to channel members Joseph Solomon, TC Pratt, Haruki Saluzzo, Peachy, King Good James, Art of Amethyst Fable, Extinction Animation, Andy the Hedgehog, Kai the Memer, Jazz, Abyss Reborn, Veranote, Josayori, and Stardust, as well as patrons Batman, Kyle Lowe, Blue Swanson, Jamisha Walker, Alangshi, Kim Yen, Crazy Asar, Gentong, Grayson Xavier, Blah Mage, TC Pratt, Finn, Celine Merriman, Eldritchia, The Stray Dog, Ulura, Greg Noble, Decagon, Jenny Chan, Catbus, Mac, Lucy Yamajiki, Selena Bibi, Pryday, Totally Shogun, Insomniac Sleep Schedule, Ling Tang Wong, Marie Greer, Potato, Jazz, Voidwalker, Latte Tabby, Christian Cook, and Adam Sorovitz, and I'll see you in the next one.